There is a meme that has done the rounds since way before Richard Dawkins even coined the term meme. And that meme is basically that Conservatives are happy to let the weak die. Not just the weak. They're happy to let outsiders and underclasses of all kinds die. Especially minorities, for example. Anyone that can be othered. Anyone who fails their idealistic, arbitrary sort of purity tests. Is that true? Conservatives are individuals as well. You can't say that every single Conservative politician and voter is a monster. But you're obviously talking about parties and ideologies. And what you choose to support does go some way to revealing something about you. Jeremy Corbyn's Labour Party got blown the fuck out in 2019. And a lot of that was from the so-called Red Wall, which was obviously northern, traditionally Labour seats that went to the Conservatives. Many of whom sort of put it down to their support for Brexit, for example, or at least wanting it to be done. And there's a phrase that the radio presenter James O'Brien sometimes uses, which is compassion for the conned, contempt for the con artists. And that's kind of how I feel about at least some Tory voters, especially these ones. There was also the HQ shafting him, but we only learned that much later. I don't know if the Red Wall voters actually knew about that. So yeah, individually, not all Conservatives are hideous monsters who want to kill you. But in terms of, like, disavowing that sentiment, especially the modern Conservative Party, Johnson's government, Theresa May's government, David Cameron's government, they've not done a lot to dismiss that idea. Case in point, if you are in the UK and you're vaguely paying attention, you will know about the Premier League footballer Marcus Rashford's campaign to help feed children. And he's got a lot of credit for it. Downing Street themselves have acknowledged and celebrated everything he has done. They made him a member of the British Empire. A high honour given to members of our country for their dutiful service to everyone. Rashford grew up in food poverty, and obviously now he's an internationally famous footballer, so he's done well for himself. But he acknowledges that he is an exception. He didn't just pull himself up by his bootstraps. There were other compounding factors. And I'm not a filthy commie like some of you in my chat. I love you. But I'm well down with things like Marxian analysis. You know, these things matter. These things have importance. They have validity. And all Marcus Rashford has been trying to do is make sure that, especially during a pandemic, children don't die. And he was celebrated for help encouraging the government to extend voucher programs for school meals throughout holidays. And he wanted to do it again for the coming half-term and the Christmas holidays. And it's a model that other parts of the Union, I think, for example, Wales, has embraced wholeheartedly. They've moved it into Easter 2021. It's doable. It's happening. But last week, the majority of Conservative MPs who did vote voted to not do that. Now, 5 Tory MPs rebelled. One of them resigned from a cabinet position, I believe. 5 out of, I think there's 364 Conservative MPs, and I think 327 of them voted. 5 out of 330. It's a very sobering statistic. Here's another sobering statistic. In 2019, 1.3 million children accessed free school meals. So that's 15% of state-educated pupils. Million. But, you know, I'm a pretty cold person. I'm pretty self-absorbed. I acknowledge that. But it's telling if I get agitated about something that there must be something serious going on. And this is crucial. This is literally life or death. But we can't forget the true victims in all of this. The true victims being the shower of absolute bastards who voted against this motion. Case in point, here's a tweet that a friend of the channel, Sheep in the Box, pointed out on Twitter earlier. This was 2 days ago, I believe. This man voted to take food out of the mouths of starving children, and he thinks he's having a tough old week because people called him a dickhead for it. This is Johnny Mercer. Really tough old week in politics. No one said it would be easy, but when you get to come up here for your end of week clear the head session, it all seems okay. Here he is, jogging on Dartmoor. My heart goes out to him. He's clearly suffering. I love that Tory MPs are banning people from their pubs. Clearly you have a lack of empathy, Kez. Because I think it's a stain on our country, a black mark on it, if a rich, entitled, morally bankrupt member of parliament can't go into their local. You should be ashamed of yourself, Kez. Think about the real victims. One of the true villains of this entire thing is another Tory MP called Ben Bradley, who Ash Shakar from Novara Media shared this clip of.
You said, can I invite you, you invited Marcus Rashford, can I invite you to one of the country's most deprived schools to come discuss with the head, who agrees with me, in brackets. And a governor at that school has responded to your tweet saying, unfortunately for you, I'm a governor at that very school, and I've just spoken to the head, and I can assure you that our view is very much that the kids need free school meal vouchers. I ask you to correct this and not give false impressions of a school which fights tooth and nail for their kids.
I have no wish to draw any of my local schools into an argument. Indeed, my
well, you
point...
did, didn't you, by inviting Marcus Rashford to come to a school?
Inadvertently, and I would like Marcus to come to school. That invitation remains open. I have no wish to fall out with Marcus. The point I'm simply making is that I think that the state can add to what's happening within our communities, that broad community support to help vulnerable people.
I want to have a discussion with you.
Bradley's become one of the main faces of this because, as you can see, he's a stammering buffoon. He tried to weaponise his constituency and one of the schools within it in order to basically bat Marcus Rashford away because, again, Rashford is making the unreasonable demands that children don't starve. There's actually another one from Twitter earlier that I found that I really liked. Nadine Dorries is a fairly well-known MP here. I think she was one of the ones who went on reality TV shows like I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here, because that's an important thing for members of Parliament to do. And she shared this meme. Hungry hog. They still need feeding, so do still put out dried kitten food or wet or dried dog food. When was this sent? Yesterday. And yes, I'm all for feeding hedgehogs. I don't have a moral objection to that. But it's interesting that the same type of people who talk about how state welfare and free school meals encourage a culture of dependency are so, at the very least, blind to optics that they think that this is not going to draw criticism. And I know it's a little thing, but it's a thing. And considering some of the things that people like Ben Bradley have said about how apparently people who receive these free school vouchers will then go on to use them to buy drugs, I'm guessing that Nadine Dorries isn't aware of the fact that it's entirely possible this hedgehog is using that wet or dried dog food to buy crack. Because she's creating a culture of dependency amongst our woodland friends. Here's something else. This isn't a great argument in terms of the parallel to everything that's happening, but I still like how it highlights the hypocrisy. A petition is going to stop MPs getting subsidised meals. Now, the basic crux of this, and I'm not going to go through the whole thing, is basically that MPs are entitled to up to £25 a night on expenses for food if they stay overnight outside of both their constituency and London. And they have legit claims. there are reasons for MPs to have expenses. Even though, as anyone who was around in 2009 will remember, we learned quite a few things about the nefarious usage of expenses. It's worth noting, by the way, that parliamentary restaurants in the House of Commons actually tend to charge at cheaper rates than the London average, which effectively means that you can get a tasty filet steak in the House of Commons and have part of it subsidised by the taxpayer, because parliamentary restaurants run at a loss, so the state makes up for that. And that's why I quite like this little ditty, because again, it blows the hypocrisy up. One of the schools my friend went to wouldn't let other students pay off their friends' debt, and if people were caught buying each other food, it would be thrown out and they'd be forced to have a cheese sandwich, never mind whether this kid could eat them, given that cheese and bread are common allergies. Yep, that sounds about right. There were corporations and pubs committed to feeding for free as a backlash, right? Yes, there was. I'm going to touch on that later. I just want to get through... try and push through the darker parts. So, yeah. Another wonderful thing that's come out of the social media commentary on all of this involves not the responsibility or responses of the politicians themselves, but the slop-drinking, brainless Tory voters who really got on their high horse about this whole issue. One of the leading ones was from this absolute rightoid brainlet. This is from Joanna Louisa. Buy a whole chicken from Aldi for £2. Roast it for Sunday lunch. Make chicken sandwiches for the following day. Stew the bones, produce a stock. Add sweet corn and dried noodles for a tasty soup. 3 tasty meals for less than a £5. It's how I fed my own children on a tight budget. Citation fucking needed. What cunt has time for that shit? Kez, spot on. Because this prompted a lot of very interesting conversation. Which again I'm going to move on to in a minute, because there's another thing that I want to sort of touch on, which again is another little brief bit of humour to try and lighten things somewhat. And that also came from an incredibly dumb rightoid on Twitter, which was this person. Now, my nana lived through the war and raised 4 children to be healthy adults on these rations. I literally think that there should be an update to Twitter's TOS that says that no one should be allowed to, in any terms of any argument, be able to bring up Star Wars, Harry Potter, the Somme, Dunkirk, D-Day, the Blitz, any of it. These things should be banned, because every time, especially conservatives, come to this, they make the absolute most soul-sucking, brain-melting takes. Wartime ration per 1 person a week. This is someone who is trying to defend the Conservatives shutting down government policies by talking about a government policy that was designed to help people not starve during a global crisis. My Tory voting grandparents are fucking furious because food is an important issue for them. And I have sympathy for your grandparents, but I won't if they vote Tory again. It's interesting to note, by the way, that outside of hostilities, life expectancy and nutritional outcomes for children actually they actually improved under rationing. Now, this is not me advocating for rationing. It's just, again, it's not just the grotesque irony of tweeting something like this. It's also just the lack of fundamental knowledge of what you're talking about. It's almost epic by how brainless this is. Oh hey, my nan did that with a chicken last weekend, and guess what? It took all fucking weekend, did feed us, but you try and do that several times a week while looking after children. Good point, Mage. Also, Kez, I'm going to bring back in what you said earlier a little bit here. So, having seen the incredible takes from the Tory brain trusts, A lot of people obviously countered it. I know that Jack Monroe, the bootstrap cook, they came up with some very good takes. They shared an old post from their blog about how mental health impacts on your capacity to, example, budget and prepare meals in advance. Also, this very, very tiny account called Bags of Taste posted this video. I'm not going to play the video. It's only about 6 minutes long, though, but I will post it in chat. This is a very cool little video that breaks down some of the issues that people like Joanna and whatever the other dumb fuck's name were talking about. But I am going to sort of summarise some of the points from this. Kez, thank you so much. I need to actually... I'm not sure. I will upload your new emote later. But thank you. Awesome. Yeah, so this is a really cool video. Why do people in poverty have poor diets? And obviously, the initial response in the Twitter thread was to... Oh, sorry, I missed something, by the way. This is the cherry on top of this person who was talking about the Aldi chickens. Can you see this bio, this Twitter bio? What is the first word in this bio? Can you see that? Do I need to zoom in a bit for you? Thatcherite. Thatcherite. I'm not even going to say anything else. So yeah, Bags of Toast responded to this. It's perfectly possible to eat for less than £1 a portion. However, you've got to get through all of this first. And then that's where they introduced the video. So let me do a little summary for you here based on the notes I took. So, people in food poverty eat more processed food, they eat more sugar, they eat more salt, they eat more red meat. Now, a lot of people tend to believe that this is down to a lack of motivation and skills. But the problem is that, motivation is incentive minus barriers. So if you see a lot of reasons to stop you from doing something, you're less motivated to do it, is the basic point. And then you have things like the cost aspect. Food preferences are worse for children, for example. And also in poorer areas, there tends to be a greater density of takeaway foods. I'm from a working class area. I'm from one of the poorer parts of Greater London. Also one of the most ethnically diverse, which is another indicator of poverty here. Reflective of the general state of how things have changed over the years. We have a shit ton of takeaway here. I can literally cross 2 minutes over the road and get 5 different variants of takeaway food. So yeah, greater density of takeaway food. And then there's something called the poverty premium, which is ironic because it basically says that there are things that people in poverty spend more of compared to those in other classes. So, Joanna's original point about the cost of the chicken is something that a lot of people jumped on. £2 for a chicken. Now, that's been disputed. I don't even think Aldi acknowledges that figure. They think even they say a thing. But the thing is that, how much does it actually cost to cook something? You could buy a tin of beans from Aldi for maybe, I think they're about 38 pence. Maybe get some little sausages on top of that. Maybe that's going to be closer to 50 or something. But that's not exactly what you pay. You're not just paying £88 or whatever, £83 pence or whatever I said. Because you have to pay for other things. You have to pay, for example, you might need to pay for petrol to drive to the supermarket. Or if you haven't got your own car, you might need to pay fare for the bus or the train. Or say you can't leave the house. You might need to have access to a phone or Wi-Fi, for example, in order to be able to do online shopping. So that's more costs that go into your food shop. There's all sorts of other things. What do you need? You may not have the right equipment in your kitchen in order to be able to cook these meals that Joanna lived on when she was on a tight budget. Some people don't have freezers. Some people don't have working fridges. Your gas might not be connected. You may not have been able to pay your electricity bill. These costs mount. And this is what is known as the poverty premium. These things count a lot more. These things sap your budget a lot more. There's also something that the video mentions called the scarcity mindset, which is basically And again, as someone who grew up in a single-parent family, my mother knows this from experience. Literally, the scarcity mindset of being able to get through the day. Like, essentially living moment by moment. Not being sure if you're going to be able to afford the bulk buy you need in order to create meals like the one that Joanna is talking about. My power went out last month for 2 days and I had to ask a mate to bail me out because of all my food went off. That is exactly what I'm talking about. And Dicey, yeah, excellent point. Yeah, man, bulk buying under COVID is fucking tough. This is the other factor that compounds this. What the Tories are doing would be bad enough in the best of times, but we are literally in a pandemic. One of the worst pandemics in human history. Certainly in modern history since the, Spanish flu? Over 100 years. The video also talks about some other things. It talks about the 4 types, essentially, of factors that go into these things. It says they're called the social determinants of health. So you have the economic, which we've kind of covered. The psychological, the structural, which is things outside of your control. So, for example, there's that rate that a lot of people can't afford, like I think it's like a £300 emergency. And then there's the practical skills, like not being able to cook, essentially. Not having the skills, or not having access to the information to help you do these things. I used to bulk buy, but stopped because of COVID. I used to get Tesco's delivery because of the distance, but now I don't ever have enough money for a bulk buy. Yeah, and this is the thing. You are making those determinations. This is you being afflicted by these determinants. This is not theoretical. Even if I didn't know you, I've known plenty of other people who are living like this. And the thing is, a lot of these Tory pricks probably know people like this as well. But they don't care. Because conservatism, especially Thatcherite conservatism, is all about personal responsibility. Anything that goes wrong in your life, particularly if it comes to things like finances, being able to provide for yourself, is a moral failure on your part. It's not systemic, because I was able to do it. I climbed the ladder. I pulled myself up by the bootstraps. You are defective. And this is one of the core tenets of conservatism. You are wrong. And I'm right. Because I survived. Ironically ignoring the fact that there would have been a plethora of circumstances around you that would have helped you survive. Conservatism is the new punk rock. Tim Pool. I mentioned sheep in the box earlier. I love sheep. He's going to be coming on soon. I think it might be next week. We're trying to work it out. And he made a great video about why people hate young conservatives. And I think it was in that video specifically where he talked about austerity measures. Now, let's not be alarmist. Let's not call the 10 years of Tory austerity a genocide. But let's say that... let's pick some words out of the ether. Let's say the UK government has inflicted great misery on its people with punitive, mean-spirited and often callous austerity policies driven by a political desire to undertake social re-engineering rather than economic necessity. Now, I'm good with words, but I didn't just pull that out of my head. That was actually from a UN poverty assessment. The United Nations offered this condemnation of us as a nation and our government. We are the 5th, I think maybe now 6th largest economy in the world. This was from 2 years ago. UK austerity has inflicted great misery on citizens. There's a figure that does the rounds about how austerity has basically killed, I think it's 120,000 people. Or at the very least, 120,000 deaths are attributable to austerity measures. There is dispute to this, of course. It's No research is perfect. There's variations in methodology. There are counterexamples that can be given. But generally, I'm usually inclined to pay attention to groups like the British Medical Journal, for example, which basically said that health and social care costs linked to 120,000 deaths in England basically were mainly attributable to the policies of the Tory government. Analysis of the data showed that between 2001 and 2010, deaths in England fell by an average of 0.77% every year. So that was 2001 to 2010. They rose by an average of 0.87% every year between 2011 and 2014. Part of the methodology for the original study was that it extrapolated from the 2011 to 2014 figures. The BMJ has updated this over time. Still remember that news story about 5 years back when the guy with learning difficulties who was paraplegic who starved to death after he was sanctioned? Yep, and there's numerous stories you can look up. The one that always stuck in my mind was, I think it was written by some bloke's daughter. And it was basically the story about how he killed himself because he couldn't get access to his benefits. Which we will get to benefits in a second. And we will reintroduce a character from early on in this tirade. But yeah, so in terms of austerity measures, a lot of the deaths were for over 60s and people in care homes. So it's not a direct one-to-one with the current situation we're in. But it's there. Tories do not care. The ideology is anti-life. And I hate hyperbole like this. I know I use a lot of flowery purple prose and that. It's kind of because I'm quite an extravagant human being. But how can you look at this in any other way? Human life does not matter to these people. So Johnny Mercer, the absolute shower of fucking diarrhea from earlier, he who was in the Dartmoor, he was on the moors, actually had some good things to say about universal credit, which is the primary social security method we have here in the United Kingdom. Which is interesting because the Tories are basically trying to shunt responsibility from central government to councils. And they also keep saying that one reason they don't need to extend the vouchers through the holidays is because of universal credit. Universal credit is one of the most inefficient, bloated and ineffective policies ever enacted by a UK government. It's forced people into destitution and death, basically. And Johnny Mercer actually once said, universal credit has the potential to help people out of poverty by removing the disincentives to move into work. And he did say, to give him some small credit, that moderate, compassionate Conservatives need to get it right. They did not get it right. He also adopted the line that you'll hear from a lot of Conservatives about how social welfare programs disincentivise people to work, which is something that has been repudiated by the National Audit Office itself repeatedly. In fact, poverty pushes people into other areas of work because if they can't find work legally, they will go to other means. Poverty increases crime, and they do not care. The biggest problem I have with universal credit is if you don't sign in online, their system, because you can't afford rent to have internet PC, you get forced out of your home because you're homeless and probably commit suicide. Yeah, I've seen that. It's like that weird argument you say, like, oh, well, don't have a phone. Don't have access to the internet. Why do you need that? You need that to access the services you need. These people. Vuvuzela, iPhone, 100 million dead. A lot of Tories are in revolt over this now. a lot of them are calling for the government to reconsider and, so they're saying things like, we've misjudged the mood of the nation, because it seems that they're surprised that the majority of people in this country don't like the idea of dead children. I skipped over something, by the way. Hey Cushy, thank you very much for coming by. This is a bit of a weird one. By the way, it's interesting that the Tories keep talking about local councils, because they also decimated their funding as well. So they're forcing this onto councils because they don't want to take responsibility for it. And also, they're forcing it onto charities and food banks. Food banks, something which should become more of a necessity because of Tory austerity measures. It's absolutely mind-boggling to me. It's not always like this, Cushy, but I do appreciate it. If you see anything you like, I would really appreciate a follow. Otherwise, it's just great to have you here. I'm going to try and round this little segment off on something of a high. So coming back to Marcus Rashford, he says he's been proud of the response to this. So a lot of communities have stepped up where the government won't. They're trying to throw in, they're donating to charities, they're donating to food banks. And a lot of businesses have started contributing as well. I think McDonald's has thrown in there. Just a lot of independent businesses are doing the same thing. Your local corner shops are doing it. Other businesses are contributing to help these people out. And also now, especially because of his profile, a lot of football clubs, I think West Ham have just thrown in, are also stepping in to add this funding. Cushy, I do have a YouTube channel. If you do get interested in what we've been talking about, I will throw a link up in chat in a little while. Actually, let's do it now. Yeah, I don't always do content like this, but politics is important, even if it is very tragic. But I don't know. Yeah, feel free to subscribe. Also, there's someone in chat called Kez. The video just gone up with them. I did a conversation with them recently about Irish history, so you can check that out as well. But yeah. I think it's interesting that it's basically England and Northern Ireland who are the ones who are resistant to this. Because again, Northern Ireland, Conservative-run government, DUP. It blows my mind that these people can wake up in the morning and believe that this is okay, and then only try and cycle back because of the backlash. Not a change of heart, but literally because they've looked at it and they've thought about the responses from their constituents and have gone, oh shit, I might lose my job because I voted against measures to prevent people from starving. How morally bankrupt are you? How completely disengaged are you from any measure of humanity and empathy? I can't imagine living like that. And I consider myself to be a fairly self-absorbed person. And even I can't conceive of this.